So it's been a whole year since we've had our heat pump installed. And today I'm going to be looking at real world data to try and explain the performance we get, the efficiencies, and to give you an indication of just how comfortable it's been to live with for the last 12 months. Now, all the data you're going to see today is collected by various sensors, some of them on the heat pump itself, some of them in the electricity consumer unit. For those of you that know, we've installed Shelly devices in most of ours to do energy data collection, and all of that's been fed into Home Assistant. Then that data has been given to ChatGPT for analysis and to get some insights from it. So we're going to walk through a number of charts. So I'm afraid there's a number of charts and a lot of data in this video, but hopefully you'll be able to see exactly how the heat pump's been performing. Then at the end, we'll ask ChatGPT what it thinks of all the data. Now, as I mentioned a few moments ago, all the data from my system is fed into Home Assistant. Now, if you're not a Home Assistant user and you go online and you look at it, you might think this can be a little bit daunting. Now, Home Assistant doesn't have to be daunting. I generally use it more as a data collection system rather than an all singing, all dancing super control system for my house. Now, here's an example of the kind of graphs that you get out of Home Assistant. The one at the top there is the external temperature sensor on the heat pump between the 1st of December and Christmas Day, or actually midnight on Christmas Day. So that's the data period that we're going to be looking at, is we're going to run December 1st through the end of December 25th. And I would say this December's been a pretty average beginning of winter month. We've had a few frosty mornings, we've had a few relatively warm days for December. We haven't had any super cold days or super warm days or anything like that. It's generally been a bit meh. But anyway, you can see there the little steps that you see in the graph. Those are the individual data points, but you can see it's been pretty much up and down most of December. Now, the graph at the bottom there, that is the kilowatt hours that the heat pump has used on each individual day. So you can see each day it kind of steps up as it sums up all of the kilowatt hours that it's been using. And then at midnight, it resets back for the next day. So again, these are great charts, but they don't really tell the story. What we need to do is take the data from these charts and then consolidate it together and look at it in different ways. And that's where ChatGPT comes in. So I asked ChatGPT to look at all sorts of data from my heat pump. I actually gave it about 300 different data points between the 1st of December and the 25th of December. Now, what it came back with in a summary was we had a pretty average month. As I said, the temperature range was about 1.5 degrees Celsius through about 15 degrees on the warmest day. For the UK, that's a pretty average kind of beginning of winter. I know officially winter doesn't start until the 21st of December, but we've had a pretty average December. Average temperature across that time is about 8.9 degrees Celsius. Now, other temperatures that are important here, the flow temperature. This is the water that is leaving the heat pump and going into the house. This is the temperature of the water that we're using to put into our radiators or into our hot water system. Now, the flow temperature across the month has ranged from 11 degrees C, which is pretty cold, up to 44 degrees maximum. And we only peaked at 44 degrees on one specific day. The average flow temperature across the whole month is 29.5 Celsius. Now, 29.5 Celsius, if you put your hands in 29-degree water, it's warm water, but it's not hot. So you might be surprised with a low flow temperature like that, how warm our house has been. The daily energy use has ranged from anywhere from 3.1 kilowatt hours on one of the warmer days up to a maximum of 15.8 kilowatt hours. But again, the average across the entire month has been about 5.5 kilowatt hours per day. And our total usage for that period, just to give you all of the numbers, was 141 kilowatt hours. Now, let's start with the outside temperature versus energy use, because that's the one that people always correlate together. They say, well, surely on colder days, it costs a lot more to run. But what we start to see when we look at the graph is that energy use doesn't suddenly explode on the colder days. Yes, it uses more energy on colder days than it does on warmer days, but it's not suddenly a massive spike. Outside temperature can be a bit of a weak predictor of what it's going to cost you. The reason for that is our house is relatively well insulated, or as well insulated as you can be without going overboard for a 1990s built house. But the system setup is set up with its weather compensation, and as we'll see later on, we look at house temperatures. This really works. So let's take a quick look at this chart, because this chart shows the energy use per day, so the number of kilowatt hours we used in a day from the 1st of December through the 25th. That's the blue bars that you can see. And then the orange line that you see plotted on there is the external temperature. So as you would expect, as the orange line dives down, the amount of energy we use goes up. But just look at those last 4 days of the month, or the 4 days of the period that we're doing up, running up to Christmas Day. Why do we use less energy on Christmas Day to heat the house when there were a lot going on that day than we did the previous 3 days? And my indication here is that this is down to the thermal mass of the house. When the house heats up and the walls get warm, it doesn't need as much energy to maintain that temperature. So even though the temperature was falling off over those 4 days, the thermal mass of the house was helping regulate the temperature. This is why I think it's important, if you have a heat pump and you can afford to do it, is to just run it all the time and not let your house get cold, because then you've got to spend extra energy to bring that thermal mass back up. Now, if we take that same chart and we just overlay a couple of averages on there, so the red line you can see there, that is our average of kilowatt hours. That's the 5.5 or 5.45 kilowatt hours, which is our average for the month. So you can see there were only a few days there that were peaking above that. And then the green line you can see across there is the average temperature. But really, what makes this an interesting analysis of the data is when we start looking at the flow temperature. So as I said, the flow temperature is the water, or the heated water that the heat pump is generating, that it's putting into the house, into the radiators, or into the hot water system. Now, our flow temperature of this system, the way the curve is designed is that it can go up to 50 degrees Celsius. So we can put 50 degrees seawater into the radiators if we need to. Generally, we only need to do that if the temperature is about -7 outside. And then the curve, the heat curve as it's called, basically tails off until we're not putting any heat in when the house is at about 24 degrees. So the flow temperature for our heat pump spends most of it's time in the low 20 degrees. Low 20-degree water is what I would call tepid. You put your hands in it and you go, it's warm, but it's certainly not warm enough to have a bath in. But it spends its time between about low 20s and mid 30s. We get the occasional brief spike where it goes up to 40 to 45 degrees, but those are pretty rare. We may see some more of those in January as the temperatures really start to drop below freezing. But at this time of the year, they are not the norm at all. Now, this strongly suggests that the space heating, the way this system has been set up and designed, is it's delivering the design temperature into the house at these low flow temperatures. There are some higher spikes, but that is generally down to when we're heating hot water. Obviously, to get hot water up to sort of 60 degrees in the tank, then you need to put more energy into it. But for space heating within the house, we're keeping our flow temperatures, like I say, in the 20 to 30 degree range. With an average flow temperature of around, I would say, about 29.5 degrees in December, this implies, a good seasonal coefficient of performance, and we're seeing sort of 3.5 for both hot water and heating. And what this really tells me is the people who did the design of the heat pump system have got the radiator sizing exactly right. Because if the radiators were too small, then we would be pushing out a higher flow temperature to try and keep the house up to temperature. If they were too large, then it would need a more volume of water, and again, we'd probably push the flow temperatures up. So the emitter sizing, the radiators seem to be just right to keep our house at a nice consistent temperature. And again, if we just take a look at the graph here, you can see the blue bars there. That's the flow temperature across the month, and it's pretty consistent. As I said, 25 to maybe early 30s is the average. And then the orange line, that is the outside temperature. So as the outside temperature fluctuates, our flow temperature isn't changing very much at all. Now let's take a look at the relationship between energy use and flow temperature, because it would seem pretty self-explanatory, wouldn't it? When flow temperature rises, energy use rises. This is classic heat pump behavior. But that's only strictly true if you use your heat pump like you would use a gas boiler, where you're chasing quick heat. So you need a lot of heat quickly, so therefore you need a higher flow temperature and you use a lot more electricity. By letting the system cruise at low temperatures saves energy overall. When it doesn't have to suddenly do a lot of hard work in a short period of time, it doesn't use as much energy. So let's take a look at the chart, because the blue bars you can see here, this is our daily kilowatt hours we've used on each of the days of the period. And then the line at the top there is the flow temperature. And what you'll notice is the flow temperature kind of ticks along. Yes, there are a few peaks and troughs in it, but it's not fluctuating massively, certainly not as much as the energy spikes you see there. So why are we getting energy spikes if the flow temperature isn't really changing? Well, the main reason is that's when we're heating hot water. On days where we used more hot water than the heat pump needed to produce or use more energy, but it didn't change the overall flow temperature to our radiators drastically. So when we look at flow temperature over time, what we start to see is, yes, when it gets colder outside, we will use more energy. But the data saying, the system is able to buffer external temperature changes pretty well. Now, this is down to reasonable insulation within the house, a well-designed system, radiators that are sized for the rooms that they're in, and the fact that we keep the thermal mass of the house warm. We don't let it cool off. We keep it at a set temperature. And all of these avoid these heavy swings. So when the temperature suddenly plummets outside, yes, we'll use a little bit more energy, but not a great deal. Now, really, probably the graph that everybody wants to see is the internal temperature versus the external temperature. So we've already seen that when the external temperature drops, we don't get massive increases in the amount of energy used. Internal temperature stability is really quite impressive. And again, I'll pop the chart up on the screen now. But as you can see, the orange line along the top there is the internal temperature of our house. So it runs between about 19 degrees up to about 21 and a half on some days. But it's pretty consistent across the entire period. And then the blue bars at the bottom there, those are the external temperatures. So you can see, even though the external temperatures fluctuate up and down quite a lot, there is very little change in the internal temperature of the house. So no wild oscillations, no obvious overshoot or undershoot patterns, which would show that there's either a design flaw with the system, or that the compressor within the heat pump is starting to cycle a lot. So this just kind of shows that it's been designed and set up correctly. We've got continuous low temperature heating. We're just constantly feeding low amounts of heat into the house, which keep it at that constant temperature. We're not on and off cycling the system like you would do with a boiler. And this kind of comfort is something that, unless you've lived with a heat pump, you don't really realize what you've been missing out on. The house is just consistently warm. And, we're not too careful with it. We don't suddenly think, well, okay, let's make sure nobody opens the front door. We quite often open the front door, go out to the car, leave the front door ajar, let some of the heat out. So we're not constantly managing the heat within the house. The heat pump just takes care of it. So to answer the key question, is it actually comfortable? Yes, it's very, very comfortable. It is a consistent temperature inside, irrespective of what is going on outside the house. Now, there are even some periods during that December period from the 1st to the 25th where the heat pump didn't use any energy. The reason was it basically switched itself off. And that was because the thermal mass of the house, so the brickwork, the insulation and everything, was carrying the load. It didn't need to add any more heat to the house because the house was maintaining the heat. And it also means that the heat pump's not needing to constantly cycle. One of the things that can shorten the life of a heat pump is when your compressor is what's called short cycling. That's coming on and going off lots of times. Ours doesn't do that because it was designed properly. And I think if you take nothing else away from this, the key thing here is to get a good heat loss survey and design done before you get too far down the path of getting a heat pump installed. Is it comfortable? Yes, it's very comfortable. Would we go back to a gas boiler? Absolutely not. So, as I've said in many other videos, one of the things we used to hear quite a lot in our house was, can we turn the heating up a little bit? Nobody says that anymore. The house is constantly warm. So at the end of all this, I gave all this data to ChatGPT and I said to it, can you please summarize all of this data in one sentence? And this is what it came up with. This is a well set up heat pump running at low flow temperatures, delivering stable comfort for modest electricity use, and only pushing hard when it genuinely needs to when it's heating hot water. That gives me the confidence that as I go into 2026 and I will have my first service on my heat pump, that the heat pump is working exactly as it was designed. So congratulations to the team at Octopus. You guys did a fantastic job. Anyway, that's my video for today. I hope you found this interesting. I'd highly recommend that if you do have a heat pump, pull that data, pull in the internal and external temperatures, pull in the flow temperature of the water, and pull in the kilowatt hours used, and give it all to ChatGPT and ask it to do the analysis for you. Anyway, I'm going to sign off. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. We're coming up soon on nearly 20,000 subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed yet, it doesn't cost you anything. Click that button. It would really, really help me out. Anyway, with that, I'm going to sign off. If I'm lucky, I will see you back here real soon. In fact, I'll see you back here in 2026 for another video. Take care. Bye-bye.